You know, it's been a long time since I've had this much beef with a boss, but also Dragon Nosuke suck my
Metal Slug Tactics.
Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and if you enjoy my coverage of turn-based strategy RPGs, other styles of RPGs, or the gaming sphere in general, say nothing of rants about particularly annoying bosses in games, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So what is it that we're complaining about today? Oh boy, let me tell you about Dragon Nosuke. Yes, you might be wondering why we haven't seen more Metal Slug Tactics content on the channel, and there are a lot of things that I want to do for the game. However, I have been stonewalled so many times by this one damn boss, and I want to talk about it today because I do think while there are definitely some tactical decision-making issues on my end that have led to problems with the boss and all that type of stuff, I think of all of the region bosses, Dragon Nosuke has a few problems in its design that other bosses like Big Shi, for example, don't. So I want to go through that today, talk about what those issues are, ways that we might potentially be able to solve those issues, and overall why I'm frustrated with what is, from a design standpoint, a very cool encounter. So first off, how does Dragon Nosuke work as a boss, and why does it bother me so much? Dragon Nosuke is a very interesting encounter in that rather than having to just run around the boss continuously until you kill it, like with Big Shi, or being able to stay out of the way of certain types of big attacks using cover like with other bosses, you're moving back and forth across a semi-set arena as the boss moves back and forth, trying to avoid your attacks. And on its face, this is a really cool encounter. I'm actually on record as saying that I really like Dragon Nosuke, potentially as one of my favorite bosses in the game. But that's before I started to get to higher difficulty levels with higher HP for the bosses. Now, as Dragon Nosuke runs back and forth, it will randomly target you with a bunch of different types of attacks. If this isn't random, by the way, I haven't figured out what the pattern is. It definitely feels random, with different attacks coming out at different times, with different versions of the fight that I've gone through. Maybe there's some sort of pattern there, I'm not sure. But things like overhead missile attacks, or a big stomp that destroys the current platform and drops you down onto a new one with new enemies, or my most hated example of an attack that this boss has, the minigun. There are a lot of different options that Dragon Nosuke has, and the idea is that you need to be able to clear out the chaff dudes that are standing around, blocking your path, dealing damage to you, so you can move back and forth across the arena to deal damage to the boss before it destroys the platform that you're on, creates more enemies and new terrain that you then have to navigate to do it all over again until you either die or beat the boss. It's a fairly simple setup in concept. However, there are issues here. The biggest problem that comes from Dragon Nosuke is, again, that damn chain gun. This attack will target 2 of your characters out of the 3 total that you have and deal just 10 damage to them with the number of shots that it gets and the damage of those shots if you don't have cover or some other sort of damage mitigation, right? Which will kill any character outright, period, done. So the idea is when you see the minigun come out, you need to either find cover or use abilities or other options to reduce the amount of damage that you're going to take. However, due to the fact that you can never tell what turn the minigun is going to come out on, and different terrain setups can make it not possible to get to cover with one or both of the characters who've been targeted, means that it is alarmingly possible to have 1, if not 2 characters get instantly downed by this attack. And it's something that's happened to me a number of times. Now, of course, what some people are going to say is like, well, yeah, but you know how this works, idiot, so always keep your characters in your cover. But you can't always do that because you have to chase the boss back and forth across the arena to be able to deal damage to it to win the fight. And like in every fight in MST, this is a battle of attrition. You cannot survive forever. There are endless waves of enemies, they have endless ammo, the boss will always continue to attack you, so you need to bring it down as fast as possible before you get overwhelmed and whittled down. Because of this, you need to be chasing the boss back and forth whenever possible so you can get your pot shots in. This can very often put you in positions where you just aren't able to get to the cover that you need to get to say nothing of the possibility that enemies could move into cover that you're trying to use, or just block your path so you can't navigate in ways that you need to. Now, of course, you could use abilities that are going to increase your damage mitigation or give you some sort of dodge, cover, etc. Or you can even just run around enough that you get some dodge to be able to survive the attack. But that's where the second big issue comes in. Because the layouts are semi-random, you could wind up in a situation where you just aren't able to navigate far enough or jump over any obstacles or anything along those lines to build up any dodge. And with the way the upgrades and levels work, you might not really get the option to be able to get any sort of dodge setups, or you might be running characters that just can't get major self-defense abilities. So there's been an outsized number of times where I just get half my party nuked by this one attack of the boss, because when it tries to use it, I'm not in a position to be able to counter it. Every other attack that the boss has, with a little bit of planning and a little bit of maneuverability, you can get around, but this chain gun will just nuke people. And while it's not the actual insta-kill attack, quote-unquote, that other bosses have, because that is actually just the attack where Dragon Nosuke jumps on certain tiles on the platform, and if you're standing on it, you get knocked off and your character dies. Similar to, say, Big She, where it just knocks out a whole section of platforms and your character will drown, so you have to keep moving around it. This still does effectively function as an insta-kill attack if you can't work around it. And unlike every other boss in the game, there's not a very clear-cut way to navigate around it. Now, ostensibly, this is an avoidable issue, right? As we mentioned, you're putting yourself out of position to be able to attack the boss, and that means that there might be times where you don't have the cover that you need or the maneuverability that you need to mitigate damage if this attack comes out. The problem, as I mentioned, is that everything is an attrition battle in Metal Slug Tactics. So while you could say just be patient and only take attacks that are safe for you, you still have enemies that are going to be spawning. You still have other attacks from the boss that are going to be coming out, including things like giant area denial flame attacks that will take chunks off of you and which can land in your cover. So even when you take cover to avoid the Gatling gun attack, you're going to burn from the fire that's been put on the ground randomly. That will then deal enough damage to down your character, adding one more element of randomness to the fight. You can't afford to take as much time as you want to be able to bring this boss down. Combine that with the fact that there's one and only one direction of fire that you can actually use against the boss, and things can very easily turn into a scenario where for what is essentially a whole rotation of damage against the boss, where you have 3 or 4 turns before the platform gets destroyed and you fall onto a new one, you're just never in a position where you can deal any sort of reliable damage to Dragon Nosuke. And when on Lieutenant difficulty, it's got 80 HP as the first area boss that you have to fight, that can be a big problem because you need to be able to deal as much damage as possible to get through it. Unlike other bosses like Big She or some of the human bosses like Picard, where you can hit them from multiple angles pretty reliably, you want to be in a situation where the boss is going to run all the way from one side of the arena to the other, you're going to spend 2-3 turns just getting in range to hit the damn thing, and if there's bad terrain setups or fire on the ground or enemies blocking your path or you need to divert to get into cover, you could be delayed for potentially an entire cycle of the fight. This means that Nosuke can wind up becoming an insane slog for no reason other than RNG, and get incredibly frustrating to try to fight as a result. To say nothing of the fact that certain characters might just not have setups that are great for fighting it, which can be very frustrating. When certain special attacks require you to be able to target the ground between enemies to be able to deal damage, or just can't fire over terrain or in the direction that you need to when you need to be able to deal damage to the boss, to say nothing of melee weapons and how terrain setups can make it sometimes impossible to hit the boss with them, you are looking at another factor where your damage is being mitigated due to issues outside of your control. Now, beyond these issues with RNG and character builds and upgrades that you may have earned from previous battles leading up to the boss, is the fact that as far as I've been able to see thus far, if you're trying to get the true ending of a run and the true final boss, you're always starting off in the jungle area, fighting Picard, and then going for Dragon Nosuke. That means that for what is potentially the most difficult area boss in the game, you have to approach it with the least amount of upgrades possible due to the fact that you've only gone through 3 missions before you get to it. Your characters are going to be minimally powerful at this point, while having the greatest amount of challenges facing them in terms of terrain navigability, damage, etc. This also means that there's a very good chance you haven't had the chance to build up character revives, or even just are in a deficit of character revives, potentially due to having had to revive characters in previous missions. So if you get one shot by the chain gun, you might be in a position where you can't get your whole team up or can't get any characters up. This doubles down on the idea that, yeah, maybe you're running characters where you can get extra dodge or extra damage mitigation like Clark, but maybe you just haven't had the chance to find those abilities before you wind up having to fight Nosuke. And this is before you even get to the highest difficulty level, which I'm terrified of. All this combined has a very warping effect on how I approach any given campaign from Lieutenant difficulty forward if I'm trying to get the true final boss ending, right? What characters am I bringing? What loadouts am I going to have on them? What missions am I picking irregardless of anything else, so I can try to maximize the levels and abilities that I'll earn before I fight Nosuke to give myself the greatest chance to actually have abilities and ammo and revives that will be able to handle it. It's the biggest hurdle that you can have during a run like this, and it means that whatever setup that you're going to be trying to go for the rest of the campaign is going to be warped around fighting this one boss. You know, I've had runs where I successfully beat Dragon Nosuke, but it drained so much special ammo and so many revives from me that I'm not in a great position to be able to handle the next area going forward, and I'm on the back foot as soon as I enter it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if it happens every once in a while, but it's very consistent that this becomes an issue due to the different layers of randomness that are stacked on top of each other. So how would I go about fixing this, right? That's obviously the question. If you're going to have criticism, if you're going to discuss this type of thing, what type of solutions can you provide? It's kind of brought my gameplay of Metal Slug Tactics to a screeching halt, and that sucks because I do really, really enjoy this game, and I enjoy the concept of how Dragon Nosuke functions. It all comes down to this big attack that can nuke your characters and how often you can find yourself in a position where you just can't do anything about it. So the question then becomes, what can be done about it? You know, I'm a big believer in not just providing criticism being like, this sucks, fix it, but actually providing some options for what could be done, because I do think there are options here, and that's always just more polite and more constructive in general. So first things first, I would say that the minigun attack on Dragon Nosuke should not be an insta-kill if you can't find cover, right? It can still absolutely be very damaging. The fact that it is an attack that just targets your characters, irregardless of what their actual position is on the map, and the onus is then on you to figure out how to mitigate that damage as much as possible, means that to feel semi-fair, it should not just be able to outright one-shot your character. I've not encountered any other attack on any other boss that can do that isn't the like big changing the layout of the map attacks, right? Knocking down platforms, firing a big laser, dropping you to a different level of the dungeon. Like, there's things that are big stage transitions that if you let yourself get caught in it will insta-kill a character. That's fine. But I don't think Dragon Nosuke should have two of those, especially when one of them is an attack that is so much harder to avoid. So I would say reduce the amount of damage that this attack can do, and then also have the overall layout of each individual layer of Dragon Nosuke's battle map be a little bit more uniform. Whether this comes from an idea of having less extreme elevation so characters can navigate around better, or having more options for cover across the entire map that characters can go to, or making it so that the boss can only move one space, so to say, between the right, middle, and left sides of the map, so it's a little bit easier to keep up with it and not have to put yourself out of position so much trying to get to it to deal damage. All of these factors would be ways that you could mitigate the overall randomness of trying to deal with what attacks it's going to bring, on top of just like, hey, maybe there's a pattern it goes through. Maybe it does flame missiles, then the Gatling gun, then stomps the stage, and that's the pattern it goes through. Maybe you can switch it up to between each stage, but those stages are consistent across multiple playthroughs. Something where you can learn how the boss is going to function so you can make more informed decisions as you're going around and trying to fight it. You're going to be fighting it a lot. It's the nature of a roguelite. Letting the player actually learn how to deal with that, I think, is a very important aspect of fights like this. Finally, maybe there's a way to get it set up, and this is a little bit more of an out there suggestion, but maybe there's a way that you can set things up so that the big flame attack that Nosuke does that deals damage to your characters but heals enemy characters can't land on cover. Because I cannot tell you the number of times where I'm in range of cover. I've tried to make sure that my characters stay in range of terrain that will give them damage mitigation so that they can survive the chain gun attack, only for the boss to then drop fire on that terrain and have literally nowhere I can go, where my characters won't just get one shot by the chain gun or mitigate some damage from it in cover, only to then burn to death due to the fire. It's so frustrating because the options are there, but due to the sequence of attacks that the boss took, that careful planning has been completely nullified and there's nothing I can do about it. Compared to fighting any other boss in the game, it just is a major feels bad, and I don't like saying things like that because so often it's like it's kind of just a skill issue, you need to just get better. There's nothing you can do about it in some scenarios like this. And that's kind of the biggest thing to me. I'm not typically the type of person to get so bent out of shape over a particular encounter or boss in a game that I start suggesting ways that it needs to be changed. If you look at all the different runs of different FromSoft games that I've done, or different turn-based strategy RPG maps or bosses that I've dealt with, and bashing my head against the wall, figuring it out, there's a way to do it. But Dragon Nosuke feels like the type of encounter where I can make all the best preparations and then just have the game set me up for failure in a way that I can't interact with at all. And while the nature of roguelites and roguelikes is you will just lose sometimes and have to start over, so often that's due to a lack of meta progression or player skill, when you can have all the progression that you want and all the understanding of the game mechanics that you want, and yet just find yourself in a situation where you're set up for failure and can't do anything about it no matter how skilled you are or what skills or characters you've unlocked in the metagame, right? And that sucks. That's unfortunate. So that is Dragon Nosuke, #1 enemy in Metal Slug Tactics. The more deaths I see for it, the happier I will be. If you have any particular suggestions on how you think Dragon Nosuke should be handled from a gameplay perspective or how it should be changed, I would love to hear about it in the comments, because I think this is kind of really the one blight on the game, other than some of the still existing bugs, that's making it hard for me to get back to and just really sink my teeth into run after run. Because at the end of the day, one of the first things I know I'm going to have to deal with is this boss, and it's just too frustrating sometimes. So let me know what your thoughts are on this boss, on the game in general, and what you would do about it. Am I wrong? Am I right? All that type of stuff. I'd love to hear about it. Until the next video, though, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I do still want to cover a bunch of Metal Slug Tactics stuff, but again, I've kind of been stymied by this encounter. So if there's a particular topic that you'd like to see me cover, though, let me know. With all that said, though, I hope you all have a good night. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.